If you're anything like me, odds are you've spent an unholy amount of time doom-scrolling Twitter and feeling that familiar flutter in your heart every time you've seen Bloodborne in the trending tab. You click on it thinking that surely this time the PC port has finally been announced, and every time you're met with the depressing sight of more dope-ass fan art. And so you close the site, shut down your PC, and go back to making blood sacrifices in the summoning circle you've painstakingly carved into the floor, hoping that someday the prayers you've been whispering to a god long since forgotten will be answered and Bloodborne can finally be played at that glorious 60 FPS. And while FromSoft can't hear your pleas over the sound of their own personal money printer, Round 8's been listening to an almost creepy degree, with the only other game they've made being a mid-ass reboot of a mid-ass MMO. Going for a Bloodborne-esque Souls-like for their second game ever felt pretty ambitious. While I can't say I'm surprised that another East Asian game studio took the plunge into making art for people who wish museums could hurt them, I can say I'm surprised that they managed to pull it off so fucking well. Seriously, I've played not a lot of Souls-like games that aren't made by FromSoft, but I've watched a ton of videos from a guy that does, so I'm pretty confident in saying that Lies of P is, without a doubt, the best non-FromSoft Souls-like game ever made. From the combat, to the lore, to the story, back to the combat, I can't think of a single word to describe this game besides impressive. So allow me to explain why you should play Lies of P over the next however many minutes, starting, of course, with the combat. Now, if you've ever played a From Software game, odds are you're watching this video on your second monitor while blitzing through your third New Game Plus run, which means you don't need me to explain how combat works. But if you've never played a From Software game and clicked on the video about Gothic Pinocchio just to find yourself asking the question, what the fuck is a Bloodborne? Then let me break down a few things real quick. Every Soulsborne, and thus every Souls-like game, is built upon the base of one of the following playstyles. There's passivity from Dark Souls, which creates a combat system heavily relying on patience and immunity frames, aka iframes, where you learn the enemy's attack patterns, time your dodge right, and make your own attack when the opportunity presents itself. Then you've got aggression from Bloodborne. I don't think there's much to say here that hasn't been said already, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Bloodborne's combat favors acting first and thinking second, with bosses that can take your health bar to 0 faster than you can say it's Bloodborning time. It gets a bit difficult to play passively and learn their movesets. Naturally, this promotes adapting to the fight on the fly in order to end it as quickly as possible, especially with the regain feature, where if you take damage, you can replenish some, if not all, of that lost health by successfully landing attacks on your opponent within the allotted time frame, short as it may be, creating a system that not only promotes but rewards beating the shit out of your opponent with whatever you can get your hands on feels fantastic to me. Not to mention, the mechanic of being able to heal yourself by putting the beat down on whatever hit you is fucking sick, and I wish more games would do something like it. But before I send myself spiraling into the vast sea of other nerdy white guys on YouTube blasting ropes over Bloodborne's combat, I'll move on to Sekiro's, which I'd honestly describe as balanced compared to the passivity of Dark Souls and the aggression of Bloodborne. Seeing as the main gist of Sekiro's combat revolves around parrying attacks while building up the enemy's posture meter and attempting to manage your own, you end up with this dynamic, almost dance-like combat. Sword strokes made with the same swift flourishes of the best ballerinas, the clashing of steel creating a rhythm unlike any other as you and your partner glide gracefully across the stage until your footing slips and you get true comboed like a fucking casual. Necessary tangent aside, the astute of you may have pieced together that Lies of P incorporates all of those mechanics into its own combat system, and now you're asking yourself why I didn't mention Elden Ring, but why would I? You've played it, I've played it, and Lies of P doesn't have a dedicated jump button. What it does have is an impressive understanding of all the combat experiences I just listed. Seriously, it takes talent to basically copy-paste the fundamentals of 3 different games and still have them blend together as well as Lies of P. Looking for a more traditional Dark Souls experience? Grab a greatsword and spam dodge rolls. Sekiro more your style? Grab a sword and parry to your heart's content. Bloodborne more up your alley? Build a weapon that feels good enough to live out your dreams of a PC port because this is the closest you're getting. I'm not just joking, you can actually build your own weapons to an extent. Each weapon comes equipped with 2 Fable Arts, which are special moves that cost between 1 to 3 bars of your Fable meter. One Fable Art is attached to your weapon's blade, and the other is attached to the handle. This means if you find a weapon with one Fable Art you really like and one you really don't, you can just take the part you like and put it with another part you also like, which opens up some super interesting weapon combinations because because now you're not just limited to whatever weapons you pick up. If you want, you can put the blade of a greatsword on the handle of a dagger, slap a fireman's axe head onto a spear hilt, or my personal favorite, putting literally anything onto a rocket-powered glaive handle. Tell me this doesn't look sick as fuck. But being able to duct tape your way through combat however you see fit isn't the only thing Lies of P offers either. Since you're playing as a puppet, you get access to Legion arms, which are made by this guy. He's very Italian and very important. We'll talk about him later. Right now, let's talk about his arms, because some of these are honestly pretty cool and can assist your playstyle depending on what you prefer. If you're big into using the different status effects that the game offers, there's an arm for each of those. You've got your electric hand, fire hand, and acid hand, and I've got to hand it to them, these are all pretty mid to me. They all involve holding down whatever button activates your arm's ability and just standing there while the arm does its thing. Credit where it's due, upgrading these does let them do more damage and even adds a bit of an explosive finish to some of them. I just personally don't enjoy how much these arms slow down the gameplay for me. But if you do prefer slower gameplay, then you've got the landmine arm and the shield arm. I feel like these are both pretty self-explanatory, and I also haven't used them, so I'm not going to give an opinion on them, but I can give an opinion on the literal cannon that you can put in your arm. Holy shit, this thing is fun. Especially when you upgrade it to be able to fire off 2 shots, there's almost nothing that feels better than just gunning away at enemies. Almost. Because there's one last Legion arm, and that's the puppet string. Last in terms of this list, at least, because it's the first Legion arm you get access to, and in my opinion, it's the only one you need. For starters, being able to yank an enemy towards you is great for when you're first starting out, so that you can space fights out and not get overwhelmed by numbers. As you upgrade it, and thus get more familiar with the combat, you'll be able to pull yourself towards enemies if you want to get aggressive. And if you decide to full send it into the puppet string arm, the final upgrade is literally just a move out of Attack on Titan. I'm not kidding, watch this shit. Sure, it's not gonna one-shot everything you hit, but god damn does it feel great when you land one of these. Bonus points too, because it counts as a charged heavy attack, meaning you can stagger an enemy provided they've got the HP to tank it. And while I could talk more about this game's combat, there's not much else I can say to really describe how the game feels to play, so you'll just have to pick this game up for yourself and see what I'm talking about. Obviously, I highly recommend it. I've called it my personal game of the year, that's how good it is. And while I'm definitely biased, I'm also right. So if you're just here to see if you should buy the game, then there's your answer. Go buy it, play it, then come back and finish this video if you want to avoid spoilers. But if you've played the game, then I invite you to stick around while I talk about the story and give some opinions on its themes and things. The game kicks off with a Surge-like opening wherein your playable character awakens on a train because of this blue butterfly that I promise becomes important later. You wander forward, collecting this lantern that houses Jiminy, who's supposed to be your guide, except he's not really working right now, but whatever, he's a useful light. Before you're able to exit the train car, the game has you pick which weapon you'd like to start out with. It's your choice between strength, dexterity, and balance. And while some gamers may feel daunted when presented with options, fear not, for your choice doesn't entirely matter. This is really just a way to pick which stats you'd like to start with more of, as well as which weapon type pairs best with said stats. With Path of the Sweeper focusing more on strength, or motivity as Round 8 calls it, you start off with the Great Sword of Fate, and you're categorically wrong if you picked anything else. But for the people who don't enjoy hitting shit with a giant stick for some reason, you've got the Path of the Cricket, which gives you fairly well-balanced stats along with the Puppet Saber. It might not be as cool as the Great Sword, but it still gets the job done and provides you with the closest thing to a blank slate for your stat distribution later down the line. And if you have daddy issues, there's the Path of the Bastard. This one focuses more on dexterity, aka technique, and equips you with the Wintry Rapier, which might as well just be a glorified sewing needle with the amount of damage it does. Sure, it's way faster than anything else, but if I have to choose between stabbing a puppet 3 times or obliterating them with the fucking Great Sword of Fate, I'm picking the Great Sword 11 times out of 10. Anyway, once you've made your choice, you get thrown into the train station, which is overrun by killer puppets. And since the idea of puppets on strings doesn't sound threatening outright, Lies of P has taken the creative liberty to make them automatons that were mass-produced to serve humans. Think iRobot with a lot less Will Smith and a lot more gothic architecture. Now, the train station serves as our tutorial area by taking us through this puppet-infested nightmare in order to get a key so that we can get the fuck out. Here, you'll learn the basics of combat, like attacking, blocking, and dodging, which I've already touched on. You also learn about perfect guards, which are just parries, stagger, which is just the posture break from Sekiro with more agency, and fatal attacks, which despite the name won't always outright kill the enemy depending on the size of their health bar and your weapon. This is also where you learn about sneak attacks, which are exactly what they sound like, and a nice little detail is that whether you have the lantern on or off makes these easier or harder to pull off. Once you've made it through the tutorial gauntlet, you get to exit the train station and enter the magical world of Krat. Well, as magical as any Parisian-esque city can be amidst a revolution from the working class. But rather than guillotines, we've got stargazers, which are the resting points for Lies of P in place of bonfires, and also where a strange voice in our heads tells us to go to Hotel Krat. Here we learn about Ergo, this world's currency / power source / life essence thing. You can use it to level up and increase your stats based on whatever you feel is most necessary. And with the tutorial out of the way, we are finally able to start exploring in order to complete our new objective of reaching Hotel Krat. Now, one thing I'll praise this game for is that its level design is very straightforward. The main path is always pretty clear, and it doesn't rely too heavily on shortcuts due to the areas themselves being fairly small. And with the main path always being clear, this really helps to encourage exploration since you won't have to worry about getting lost and having to backtrack. Sure, it takes away that uneasy feeling in a Souls game where you're not sure if the risk of straying from the main path is worth it, but I personally don't mind that. It feels refreshing to play a game like this where I'm not constantly worried about getting my shit rocked by reused boss model number 39 because the devs thought it'd be funny to hide it at the end of a random corridor. Tangent aside, now that you've wandered a bit, you should have come across the festival grounds where there's another stargazer, a merchant, and our first boss. The merchant is literally just here to let you purchase the other two weapons in case you're not rocking with whichever non-greatsword option you chose. And once you're prepped for combat, you can kick down that door to fight the parade master. The boss enters the arena, we get our shot of him showing off, and then the camera zooms out so you can really get a sense of how small you are in this world. And a nice little detail here is that the busted sign only lights up the letters to spell out fetal, which is a nice precursor to the position you'll find yourself in by the end of this game. Honestly, there isn't too much to say about this boss. It's a good introduction for the game. His attacks are pretty well telegraphed, and he doesn't deal obscene amounts of damage. He also rips his own arm off to beat the shit out of you once he reaches half health, so that's pretty cool. Once the fight's over, we can finally enter Hotel Krat, so long as we pass the security test, which literally just asks, are you a puppet? Which would normally seem like a garbage security system, but in this world, puppets are unable to tell lies. Except you, because you're special. If you answer truthfully, however, the door tells you to fuck off. I personally think it would have been funny to roll credits afterwards and have it be an achievement, but that's probably why I don't make video games. Instead, you can just go back as many times as you want until you feel like lying so that you can continue the game. Upon entering, you meet Sophia, the woman that's been telepathically communicating with you via stargazers. She's very blue, very Victorian, has a super sick butterfly pin, and tasks us with clearing out Elysian Boulevard. After we meet the rest of the hotel, of course. Talking to Sophia again will get you the Moonface pocket watch, which lets you travel back to the hotel at will, as well as a properly working Jiminy who's a lot calmer than normal, I guess. According to Sophia, they're based on old Krat folklore in which crickets acted as guides. Sophia can also help level you, but you can do that at literally any stargazer, so it's not that big of a deal. Joining Sophia is Antonia, the owner of this fine establishment. She's wheelchair-bound with something called the petrification disease, but still seems as happy as she can be, circumstances aside. She tells us that Geppetto had left for Elysian Boulevard and never returned, so now we've got 2 reasons to clear the place out. Antonia gives us a spiffy new fit and sends us on our merry way to talk to her butler, Polendina. He's a puppet, although he's not affected by the puppet frenzy somehow. I'm sure that'll be explained later, but for now, he's just here to sell things for Ergo and tell us what the laws of the Grand Covenant are. The Grand Covenant is a set of rules that all puppets, except you, have been built with, and they are as follows. A puppet must obey all commands, a puppet must never harm humans, a puppet must serve its master, and lastly, a puppet cannot lie. Obviously, something went shit side with the Covenant, because these puppets are killing people left and right. right. Luckily, we aren't bound by the Covenant, so we can fight back, which brings us to Eugenie. She's the weapons expert, meaning she can upgrade our equipment, and she's also the source of where we get our first, and as far as I'm concerned only, Legion arm. Now that we're fully equipped, we can set off to find Geppetto, enter Elysian Boulevard, the first true area of the game outside of the tutorial. As far as level design goes, it still feels like a tutorial, except for what to expect within said levels, and it's honestly all the worse for it. This area is riddled with shortcuts to the point of redundancy, relies heavily on gank attacks, and stashes a little something in damn near every corner they could. Throw in a couple tougher enemies that won't respawn whenever you die, and you've got your basic Lies of P level. Outside of the layout though, this level looks beautiful, and climbing through the rooftops felt pretty fun when I wasn't getting ganked. And since there's an item in every nook and cranny, I spent a solid amount of time wandering around this place. While doing so, I met Toma, a young child who's stuck inside sick and reminisces on the fun times he'd had with his friends, and Murphy, who's a police officer, I guess. Whatever, cool story, kid, but we've got puppets to kill, and a baby to save if you're not heartless and talk to this weeping woman by the window. First things first, though, we've got to find Geppetto, but I couldn't find him anywhere around this area, so he's got to be across this bridge where some madman rocking a donkey mask is beating the shit out of someone's carriage. Turns out there's someone in said carriage, and this ass won't let us pass without a fight. Congratulations, you've now made it to the second boss fight against the game's first human boss. His moveset's honestly pretty easy to read, and since he bleeds, he's fairly weak to swords, meaning he'll go down quickly. Once that's done, the carriage opens and out steps Geppetto. 2 birds, 1 stone. Sick. After looting the donkey for his clothes and weapon repair kit, we talk to Geppetto, who tells us that he was on his way to check something out at City Hall. But alas, he's ill-equipped, unlike us, meaning we have now taken on his quest to investigate. And so we journey onwards to City Hall, where we learn how to cut and paste weapon parts together, which is fucking sick, as I said before. This is also where we can find the Weeping Woman's baby and the third boss fight. I gotta be honest, it kinda sucks. This guy's wind-ups were long enough for me to consider going back to college to write a better joke, and the amount of power he packs into those hands was enough to knock some sense into me. On the bright side, his timing is pretty easy to learn, but on the downside, that just means it's easier for you to trigger his second phase. I'm not sure if it's because I recorded this on New Game Plus, but the second phase of this fight absolutely bodied me. The boss starts doing a metric gigafucks worth of electric damage and pulls out this bullshit grab move that one-shot me no matter where my health bar was at. Straight up, if it wasn't for that one dog shit attack, I wouldn't have had to summon the Spectre for help on this boss. And for clarification, this is only one of 2 times I used summons on these bosses. The rest of them I beat with my own 2 hands. Tangent aside, once you kill the boss, you get Murphy, the police doll, and his whistle. You can also grab that woman's baby if you haven't already, except it's not a baby, it's a puppet. Kinda weird, but might as well take it back to the woman. So you do, just to find out that she believes it's a real baby and asks us if it's pretty. Obviously, I'm gonna lie to this woman. What kind of monster would I be if I told her it was hideous? Plus, you get a record out of it if you lie, so that's pretty cool. And if you felt bad for Toma, you can go back towards his apartment and blow the whistle that Murph dropped. Toma gets really excited about this, but then tells us how much he misses his friends and wishes he could play, but he's too sick. After that fucking bummer of a time, we can head back to the hotel and converse with Geppetto, who gives us our second Legion arm and teaches us about P organs. P organs are upgrades you can give to your character's heart that are acquired with quartz. You pick out which upgrade you want, and then slot X amount of quartz into it to purchase it. And when you slot the quartz, you get to pick a second ability boost of your choice for attack, special attack, stamina, or other. Once you've got your upgrades, talk to Geppetto again so we can be told where to go next. It's the factory. I guess this inventor guy who goes by the name of Lorenzini Vanini, I'm not joking by the way, is trapped there with the killer puppets because he wanted to shut down production. He also unlocks the ability to upgrade puppet string, and that's a good enough reason for me. So we journey on to the factory, and this is where we're introduced to fire damage. If there's one thing the devs aren't, it's subtle. But this is also where we're introduced to Arlecchino, the King of Riddles, and also my favorite character in this whole game, hands down. Seriously, the voice actor for this dude fucking snapped on his performance. His tone, delivery, pronunciation, everything about it really helps sell the mysterious, slightly deranged person on the other side of the phone. His riddles are fun too, and he always leaves you with something to think about whenever you find one of his phones around Krot. I'm not going to be going over his riddles though, because I don't have that kind of time, but also because I'd rather give give people the opportunity to experience this storyline as spoiler-free as possible. So instead, let's head into the factory. Now, while the overall environment is pretty decrepit, the area as a whole is fun to explore and doesn't get too complicated with its switchbacks. It's also where we're introduced to fire damage. Again, because status effects in a Souls-like are a universal constant that must be ever-present regardless of how much sense they make for the world. But that's not the only new thing you're introduced to. The factory is full of so many new interesting characters and constructs, the likes of which you've never seen before. Meet Shield Guy, the puppet with literal fucking fridge doors for hands. He'll block your attacks, stagger you for having the audacity to clip his hands, and won't respawn upon death, which means we can move on to the puppet of the future. If you've ever seen Iron Giant and thought, hey, what if this dude had goddamn wrecking balls for hands? This is what you'd end up with. And as intimidating as they look, I promise you they aren't. Just bite their ankles, avoid their balls, and you're golden. Just like the mask of this guy. The shovel guy hits like a fucking truck if you still haven't learned what just parry means, but otherwise he's not that tough of an enemy and low-key a highlight in the cast for me. Never really got mad when I saw one of these guys pop up, but I can't say the same for this loser. I'm not sure what it was, but this guy was mopping the floor with me for a while and I have no idea why. It's not even like his moveset is that hard to read, and you can even perform fucking backstabs on him with the right positioning. Honestly, I didn't even want to fight this guy, but it's pretty obvious that he's got a screw loose and I want that mask. Once the drip is acquired, the cool kids finally respect you enough to converse with you, and it's here that we meet the Red Fox and the Black Cat. Full transparency here, killing the survivor has no effect on whether or not you're able to talk with them. I just needed a segue, and this is the best I could come up with. Which feels like what the directors probably said about the voice acting here, because I gotta be real, the Red Fox's performance is passable for someone on their third credited voice acting job, but she just falls flat next to the Black Cat VA who's really selling this character. Sold it so well I even bought this book at a discounted price, and now that I say it out loud, I just got scammed, didn't I? That doesn't matter though, it's time to fight a boss. Right after we find Vanini, who tells us that his butler puppet Pulcinella went to try and shut down the factory. If the countless puppets haven't clued you in, I don't think he succeeded, but we might as well check and see if we can. And it's here we can fight the fourth story boss, the basement furnace from Home Alone. Having fought the thing, I can kinda see what young Kevin was so spooked about. His attacks could two-shot me, and they did plenty of times, despite his moveset being easier to read than whatever you think is the easiest thing to read. What, I can't come up with all the jokes for you. Regardless, once you manage to get this boss down to half health, it'll run to the middle of the arena and piss lava to overheat you instantly if you're within range. Normally this wouldn't be a problem, but this is also where he breaks out the ranged attacks and will occasionally spam the ever-loving shit out of them. But aside from how annoying the projectiles can be, this boss fight's actually pretty good. Hell, it might even be my favorite early game boss simply for the atmosphere. And on the plus side, once you kill it, you can find Pulcinella, who's somehow still functional despite being in desperate need of repair. Another quick stop by Vanini and he'll tell you to head back to Hotel Krat so that he can thank you properly. Straight up, if someone with this level of drip told me to do something, I'd listen. That's a man who obviously knows what he's about, and what Vanini's about is upping your puppet game with his special Italian herbs and spices, which is just my way of saying he'll upgrade your puppet arms and give you some cool grindstones. This is probably a good time to mention grindstones. The quick of it is that each weapon has a durability meter that depletes when you hit things. I have no idea what actually happens when it runs out because the game said it would lower my damage, so I spent every free moment sharpening my sword. The special grindstones Vanini sells you can apply status effects to your weapons, which is pretty cool once you learn your Pokemon matchups. Anyway, talking to Vanini a bit more will tell you that he invented the Legion arm and can make us new ones, which would probably be really cool if this puppet string wasn't surgically attached to my body. We also learn that Pulcinella is technically the only family he has left, as his parents were murdered when he was a child. He's basically Batman, just with none of the fighting skills. Or detective skills. Or bat signal. Come to think of it, he's just a pretty smart dude. Not like he'll let you forget it either, bro brings it up any chance he gets. So once you're done hearing about how mind-bogglingly brilliant Vanini is, you can get going to the next area, Moonlight Town. Turns out the Archbishop of Krat was opening the church for refuge when the frenzy started, but they've been weirdly quiet since then, so we're being sent to check on them. We make our way to the Pilgrim's Cable Railway, lie to this stalker in order to board. No idea what happens if you don't lie to them, but if I had to hazard a guess, I'd say they either tell you to fuck off or try try to kill you, and ride the railway up with our tour guide Jiminy. During this non-optional exposition dump, we're informed that the Archbishop is basically the whole reason why Krot is the way it is. Industrial-wise, not puppet-wise. And if you can't stand listening to Jiminy talk, the view's not half bad either. Once we've reached the top, we're introduced to the newest enemy type, carcasses. They're basically zombies, we just don't call them zombies, just like every other piece of media that totally isn't about zombies because they're called pick your poison. These guys are surprisingly fast and honestly pretty creepy, but they're weak to swords on fire just like any human would be. Trudging onwards and upwards, we eventually meet Giangio, the stuttering alchemist. He's sick and is on search for this gold coin fruit in order to cure whatever ailment he's got going on. Not too sure if I trust him, but that might just be the bias Harry Potter distilled within me against pasty white boys and wacky headgear with a speech impediment. He also gives us the Wish Cube, which harnesses the energy of a shooting star to grant a wish of your choice, so long as that wish involves regenerating one of your meters. It also takes a whole business day to activate, so I literally never used it despite being able to upgrade all the things I hate about it. Companion Cube now safely in our possession, we can finally get to the cathedral where I really hope we don't run into any eldritch horrors beyond my comprehension. After clearing the bridge and admiring the view, we can enter the cathedral to find it taken over by an eldritch horror beyond my comprehension. With this being a video game, we've got to kill it, which means we've got to follow it down the hole it slithered into. But once you go down, you spend the rest of your time here trying to get back up again through the most convoluted game of chutes and ladders I've ever played. Seriously, this whole area is just climbing ladders until you get knocked down to the bottom by one of the few carcass variants we get to meet. There's the small speedy ones, the massive molasses slingers, and whatever the fuck this thing is. They exist solely to punish you if you dare to stop moving by sending your ass way back down into the goop where you'll get to climb the same ladders all over again until you finally reach an area that unlocks the ability to skip the ladders altogether. Baffling layouts aside, we eventually reach the next level where we meet Cecile, who asks us to find the Archbishop's holy mark for her. Naturally, one would assume that it's a drop from the boss in this area, but no. It's actually just sitting in his office, which you can find via a bit of exploring. There's also an elevator that'll take you all the way to the top of the church, and I can't help but wonder why it couldn't go down to the bottom floor too. No idea, but the top of the church does have Alidoro, the treasure hunter. He's a unique vendor that will sell you special weapons or amulets for the ergo fragments that drop from major bosses. It's a fantastic idea that I wish they'd introduced before I had cashed in the boss drops for extra levels, but I can't lie, it was a great motivator for a second playthrough. Alidoro will also ask if you know of any safe places he can chill at, where you're given the choice between telling him about the hotel or sending him to the factory. Now, on my first playthrough, I sent him to the factory, which he got very annoyed by once I swung through to visit. So I told him about the hotel and went on with my day, since I think sending him to another hostile location may lock you out of being able to buy cool things from him, and I'll be damned if I don't get my cool things in a video game. Now we can head back down, give the holy mark to Cecile, and go fight the next boss, Fallen Archbishop Andreas. He's got a creepy entrance that does a great job at setting the tone for what kind of boss he's gonna be. Dropping in as this big gelatinous blob before letting out a roar and slowly approaching with his big writhing tentacles definitely gave the impression that this was going to be a whopper of a boss fight. And he was. His attacks hit like freight trains, all of his movements are big and exaggerated, and I spent my time wondering why they didn't make his health bar match. But that's because this is a two-phase boss fight, as in, you kill the first boss and then it evolves into its final form. This feels like it's meant to be an oh shit moment like Rock Lee dropping the weights, and I've got to admit that it definitely evoked that response from me the first few times it happened. The first few. We'll get to that later, though. The Archbishop's second phase is dope as fuck when he enters. This grotesque, writhing mass of tentacles reaches within and begins to peel away the layers like some kind of eldritch onion to reveal Fallen Archbishop Andreas, the one-winged angel. Aside from his title sounding like a stage name for TikTok's next big metal band, this phase is so good. His attacks are faster, he closes the distance efficiently, and he still hits like a freight train. Plus, his first phase is still here and will still fight you if you manage to end up behind him after dodging an attack or something. My only problem with this fight is that if you won, you can just walk around him at the start of phase 2 and fight the same slow blob from phase 1. This feels like something where they wanted to create the illusion of fighting two bosses at once without actually making two separate bosses, and while the idea is actually really cool in theory, it's just too easily exploitable to work here. And once we've defeated God's favorite angel, a cutscene plays where we see ergo from the other bosses we've fought being siphoned into the air, transmitting itself to this tower in God knows where with God knows who ominously sitting in a chair. I'm sure this will have absolutely zero effect on the story, so let's just get back to the hotel and check up on everyone. Alidoro's still here selling stuff, and if you talk to Sophia again, you can learn a bit more about her. For instance, she's something called a listener, which means that she can hear ergo and communicate with puppets. Why does she have this ability, you ask? Who knows? Maybe she was born with it. Maybe it's Mabel. Yeah, she was born like this. She inherited it from her mother, who apparently hated the ability. Also, we're like the only puppet that can actually hear her for some reason, which is only minorly unsettling. I say minorly because the next area we journey to is only majorly unsettling. That's right, it's the slums level. We've got to trek our way through the forest so that we can check out what the Black Rabbit Brotherhood is doing in the Malum district. Sounds fine on paper, but in practice, it's easily one of my least favorite chapters of the game. The forest on the way to the Malum district is lit so poorly that even with high brightness and the Gemini lantern on, I had to close my fucking windows if I actually wanted to see anything. I don't care if it takes place at night. If I have to crank my gamma to Bruce Banner-esque levels just to make sure I can perceive things happening on screen, it's too dark. Not to mention, this place is littered with enemies pretending to be dead bodies, dogs hiding behind bushes, and a literal bear. And I think this is where I can comfortably talk about one of my only problems with this game, which is its over-reliance on surprise attacks. I'm sure everybody remembers playing a FromSoft game and stumbling across a chest that either lured you into an ambush, sent you to an area to be ambushed, or just straight up was the ambush. It creates this ever-present sense of foreboding every time you see a chest or an item sitting in a room. Is it actually safe to open? Am I gonna get vored by a mimic? Will I be trapped in there with some big monster? Is the reward even worth the potential risk? The only way to actually find out is to take the plunge, and more often than not, there's not actually anything waiting for you. That's gone in Lies of P. The first time I got ambushed while picking up an item, it gave me a little smile at how well the devs understood the FromSoft formula. But when it happened the second time, and then a third time, and so on and so forth in the same area, that smile of understanding quickly turned to annoyance. When it feels like you can't even go pick up the least valuable item without getting jumped by some random enemy, that sense of foreboding evaporates just as quickly as your health bar because it feels like the devs are beating you over the head with a bat, screaming, "See? It's just like Dark Souls. We're doing what the Dark Souls games do because we're a Souls-like game. Do you get it yet?" It's the one aspect that Lies of P never lets up on, but God, I wish they would, because outside of that one little design choice, everything else just works so well. Anyway, once you've reached the rundown town and get ambushed by the giant carcass monster, we're officially at the Malum district, where our character is greeted by some dude on a microphone who tells us to fuck off or face the consequences. And considering we're 0 for 2 on fucking off, it's time to face some consequences, which just means another giant carcass monster fight. But hey, we're finally at the next major area, and the Red Fox and Black Cat have graced us with their presence yet again. Looks like they've got their eyes on some treasure that the Brotherhood's got, and we're here for the Brotherhood, so maybe we can work something out. Sure, why not? I'm never gonna say no to allies in a game, even if they are kinda useless. They'll follow you around and fight a little bit, provided the enemies have enough health for a slum-side beatdown, but after falling through this floor and making our way back up, the Black Cat needs to take a breather due to his illness, so they kind of fuck off just as soon as they joined. I appreciate the sentiment, but bailing out right before the section that's actually challenging so that we're left to clear it out on our own gives me not so fond memories of high school. We're dropped into an arena with one giant carcass monster and a bunch of the ranged carcasses scattered around the high ground. This place rocked my world the first time around, with the big guy relentlessly slamming me and the ranged enemies taking pot shots if I tried to avoid him. Not to mention that attempting to avoid the absolute behemoth in the middle will lead to you getting jumped by demon dogs, caught in bear traps, and still taking huge loads to the face from the carcass cannons up above. Overall, it's not a great time, but once you finally manage to kill everything, they won't respawn, meaning you're free to explore the area in peace and move on. Right into the next carcass monster. I fucking hate it here. But clearing this whole place out gives you access to another riddle, and you get the chance to meet a member of the Black Rabbit Brotherhood Brotherhood. She's wearing a bunny mask, fitting as ever, and apparently thinks we're hot. Cool, I guess, but she's also assuming we're human, so I get the feeling this young lady's gonna end up pretty disappointed. You can head into the bar for some good old liquid courage, but unfortunately the bartender has been turned into a giant carcass with extendo blades for hands and took their patrons with them. Clear out the bar, open up this shortcut right back to the start of the Malum district, talk to this merchant if you want to buy some new stuff, and then head on over for the boss fight. One badass entrance later, and we've finally reached the Black Rabbit Brotherhood. I'm not gonna lie, this is probably one of my favorite boss fights in the game. Your main opponent is the biggest, oldest brother who zips across the arena with unnatural speeds to slam his Guts greatsword through your ribcage before you can learn his moveset. However, once you've got him downloaded, his siblings will begin to jump in at various health intervals, each with their own unique weapons and fighting styles. There's the youngest one that tried flirting with me earlier, but I play Destiny 2, meaning I don't talk to women, so I had to make sure she knew her place. She's got 2 daggers and a flashy fighting style that gave me anime vibes with all the flips she was throwing around. Using her speed to her disadvantage, I baited her across the arena to deal damage while I waited for the big guy to catch up. And once I had banished the woman, the next brother was ready to jump in with his electric spear. He's got a lot of reach and loves his lunge attacks, but if you just get into his personal space and start going ballistic, he doesn't really have much to offer. The third sibling, on the other hand, has quite a bit to offer. Wielding a sword and the puppet string, he's basically a mirror match of my playstyle. Squaring off against him and the eldest at the same time can give the same vibes as any Jujutsu Kaisen fight with Yuji and Todo, with the way they almost seem to tag each other in to apply pressure. That being said, none of the siblings that engage have enough health to outstay their welcome, and if you engage them quickly, then they'll jump out once they're low enough. As for the big guy, his movesets are long and go kinda hard, but unlike me, he's got the stamina to back it up. On top of that, his attacks are telegraphed easily enough to the point where it's easy to avoid them while fighting the other siblings. Overall, I'm not sure how to feel about the difficulty of this fight. I remember on my first playthrough, this one gave me a bunch of trouble to the point where I ended up using summons to make it through. After all, they're fighting with multiple people, so why shouldn't I? But on my New Game Plus playthrough, I cleared this fight on my first try. I don't know if I just got good or if this fight got nerfed, and I don't feel like going through the patch notes to check if it did, so I'll just use this opportunity to boost my own ego. Once you've packed Big Bro into a coffin, the siblings carry him off along with his sword, much to my dismay. Sad as I was that there wasn't a cool new weapon to try, their hideout is now open to explore. Inside, you can find their journal, where you learn that they've been dealing with the alchemist and gold coin fruit, an article that states the masks are a hierarchy with zero information on how that hierarchy works, and this giant painting that looks just like you. Weird, but whatever, maybe Father Geppetto will take it. And that's all there is, meaning we can take this elevator all the way up to this room where our stuttery friend Giangio is. Not too sure how he got here, but through the doors stands the gold coin fruit tree. Aside from being very pretty, you can harvest the fruit to use as another currency with Giangio to purchase different wish stones for your wish cube. I will never come back here again. Coincidentally, the gold coin tree is literally on Hotel Crop property, so where the fuck was the key for the door, Antonia? Why'd I have to run my ass all the way down to the slums just to circle back and open the door from the other side? Whatever, let's go give this painting to Geppetto. He hangs it up and then tells us that we have to go to Rosa Isabella Street to find the King of Puppets and kill him because he's the one that started all of this. Antonia has the key, and she's also not doing too hot with that petrification disease, so I'd like to apologize for my previous outburst. Key acquired, we can make our way to Rosa Isabella Street, the heart of the puppet frenzy. Upon entering, you can find this sick old lady who's craving this one specific kind of wine, so I guess we'll keep an eye out for it. Making our way further into the dilapidated entertainment district, it's time to introduce all sorts of new enemies to the puppet mix. We've got kamikaze harlequins, puppets with guns, puppets with bombs, and the one addition that literally nobody asked for, demonic baby puppets. Manage to make your way through these lovely introductions, and you get rewarded with another boss fight against every retail worker's worst nightmare, the White Lady. I've gotta be real, I don't understand what the point of her character is. She kinda just shows up, talks about her more famous sister Adelina, then tries to kill us. It doesn't help that she's pretty bitch-made too, like it's not even a difficult fight. On the bright side, you can get her fit, and this is fire. After the fight, we get to meet Julian the gentleman whose wife died in a fire. He asks if we can visit his old place and see if there's anything we can find so that he's got something to remember her by. And since I'm not heartless, obviously I said yes. So we make our way to and through the sewers, which thankfully don't overstay their welcome. I would have preferred not having to enter the sewers at all, but it is what it is because we've finally reached Rosa Isabella Street. I'm sure it was magnificent in its prime, but even now there's still a haunting beauty about it as you walk the empty road with nothing but the sound of clanking metal and crackling fire to fill the silence. Unfortunately, that silence is broken up by the giant ball of flaming puppet parts rolling towards you to kick off the next boss fight. Don't worry, we're not fighting the giant ball of flaming puppet parts. We're instead fighting the literal clown that sent it our way. I fucking hate this fight with every fiber of my being. The boss's windups are long enough that by the time the attack actually happens, you've probably fallen asleep. He hits harder than any clown should have the right to, and every time you die, you've got to dodge the same flaming ball and try to fight off the same few puppets with flamethrowers that would love to join in. Feels fucking incredible when you finally kill it and the clown explodes into pieces though, so I'll give him that. And with the clown killed, we can make our way to the Monad Charity House, or as I'll refer to it, the Opera House. Go figure, it's overrun by puppets. But these ones are a bit different since we've now got these giant half-spider, half-opera singer puppets to deal with. I have no idea what purpose they're supposed to serve, but the design is incredible and they get bonus points for not being actual spiders. They also cause disruption, which is this game's insta-kill debuff, meaning that if the meter fills, you will die on the spot. In addition, the spider ladies have the added mechanic of being able to buff the other puppets around them, meaning if an enemy is within a close enough proximity to the spider, they take less damage and slowly regenerate their health. I love this since it actually makes you think about how to proceed with an encounter rather than swinging a big sword and hoping for the best. You now have to strategize and figure out if the best option is to try and lure the smaller enemies out of range so that you can actually fight them, or do you rush in and try to take down the spider lady before the smaller ones have time to start attacking you. Hell, you can even run right past them if you want, the choice is all yours. And once you've made your way through the Opera House's side sections, you'll get the opportunity to meet Adelina. Not sure why she's still in the Opera House, but I guess she's parched and would love some fruit. It just so happens that I bought this apple from Polendina earlier, despite not knowing if it would have any sort of value later on. Anyway, give her the apple and she'll tell you that she's always coveted her sister's voice and that she'll be dying soon. As tragic as that is, we came here to kill a puppet king, so let's go do that. Upon entering the main theater, you're greeted with a play composed of two puppets. One looks eerily similar to you, and the other looks just like Daddy Geppetto. The Geppetto-looking puppet walks over to the U-shaped puppet and removes what seems to be the heart from its chest cavity before walking to the other side of the stage and placing it in a different puppet. If you think this feels like foreshadowing, you're right, but we'll get to that later, because right now we've got something pretty important to look at. Once the play has concluded, the King of Puppets descends from the ceiling, and right out of the gate, I love his design. This puppet looks like an amalgamation of themes you'd expect to find in an opera house, with these grandiose decorations, an overly expressive face, and a cape that could probably serve as stage curtains. He attempts to shake our hand, but the main character is autistic and doesn't fuck with friendly physical contact, so he smacks the hand away. The king gets sad, and now it's time to fight. Now, I should say I've played this boss fight before it got nerfed, as well as after, and if I'm being completely real here, I don't think it needed the nerf. This boss has really long windups and easily parryable attacks that aren't difficult to learn the timing of, and he'll occasionally start an AoE attack that will require you to get closer to him or run away depending on which animation plays. He's also got rockets for some reason, but they rarely come into play if you're constantly dealing decent damage and stay close enough to the boss. Sure, he deals a ton of damage if he actually hits you, but if I had a nickel for every video game boss that dealt tons of damage, then I'd have enough money to put videos out more consistently. Haha, please subscribe. Anyway, I said that this fight didn't need to be nerfed, and while I stand by that, I can understand the reasoning behind it. With the first phase being relatively easy and the second phase being a complete tone shift, dying dying to the second phase just means you're running back to the first phase all over again. And while cutting down the time between phases is always welcome, some players may miss out on what I believe to be the version of this fight that's actually fun. I love seeing these gigantic bosses utilize their size and their movesets, which the King of Puppets definitely does. Some of his attack chains are built around using the momentum from previous moves. He'll occasionally throw a punch at you that can hit twice due to his arms having extended components, and he even uses those arms for grand sweeping attacks in an attempt to keep you away when you start doing too much damage. It's just such a fun and unique fight in this game that I wish it hadn't been split into 2 phases, because once you've defeated the King of Puppets, his chest opens to reveal the pilot of this titan, Romeo. Romeo is another humanoid fight, except he's also a puppet and wields a gigantic chainsaw scythe. Is the weapon badass? Yes. Is it a good fight? Absolutely. Do I think we needed to fight Romeo? Hell no. Going from this big, slow-moving behemoth of a boss to the Hot Topic poster boy is such a jarring shift that I never felt quite prepared for. Romeo opens with one hell of a gap closer, and once he's on you, he doesn't let up. His combos are tricky to get the hang of, with each attack feeling like its timing is just ever so slightly different from the others, while also being long enough that by the time it's over, you're most likely dying to chip damage unless you're getting perfect blocks every single time. And to top it off, once he reaches half health, he'll set his scythe on fire and up the aggression, meaning you'll have to try and keep up with an even angrier robot that can now set you on fire. Now, I know it sounds like I hate this boss, and while there are some moves that infuriate me to no end, I can't say that I do. Both phases are enjoyable for their own reasons, and having them be one right after the other creates a really nice dichotomy within the gameplay that I quite enjoyed, since it does force you to adapt on the fly, or even prepare by equipping different weapons for the different phases. Being able to interact with all the different combat mechanics in one epic fight is a bold idea, and I believe this boss nailed it, but from a narrative standpoint, this just doesn't make any fucking sense. As far as we knew, the King of Puppets was the one who started the puppet frenzy, so being met with this Goliath of a machine seemed fitting. But beating this thing just to find out it was the penultimate babushka shell for a puppet that could still kick your ass is kind of annoying. Like, why does he pilot the mech? Is it supposed to be some kind of plaything for him so that when he hops out of it, we know he was just toying around? Or is it supposed to be some kind of life support system, since when it opens, he's just kind of hanging there by his arms, and oh my god, he's Puppet Jesus. I swear to god, if the intended metaphor here is that killing the mech was him dying for the sins of the puppets in order to be reborn as Romeo's savior of puppets, I'm going to fight somebody. Maybe I'm just reaching, and I really hope I'm reaching, but with how unsubtle most media is with their Jesus imagery, I don't think I am. Although if he is Puppet Jesus, the implication here is that we're actively fighting back against God's plan, not Drake's version, and that is some wild symbolism to throw at your audience at the halfway point of the game. Plus, he says thank you, Carlo, when he dies, referring to you and implying he might not have been in control of himself. Regardless of the reason, now that he's dead, then the puppet frenzy should be over, which means we're out of things to do, so let's head back to the hotel and talk to people. And if you decide to take the long way back, you can find that guy Julian's dead wife, assuming you didn't stumble across her on the way to the opera house. Weird thing is, his wife is a puppet wearing a wedding ring and everything, even left some kind of note saying that she loved Julian, which is simultaneously sweet and odd, but who am I to judge? Take her things back to Julian and he'll tell you to keep the ring, which is nice, I guess, but I don't know what we're going to use it for. So for now, let's just continue back to the hotel for some good old-fashioned conversation. Speaking with Vanini earns you his congratulations on defeating the Puppet King, as well as an ergo wavelength decoder. This is a device that should allow us to take in ergo wavelengths and eventually interpret them into a message so that we can maybe figure out why the Puppet King started this whole frenzy in the first place. Cool concept, but we literally don't do anything with it. There's no mechanic to collect the data, there aren't even any new collectibles to find that would further progression with it. This item simply exists until it becomes relevant again, which feels like a wasted opportunity to further encourage exploration. Speaking of things that simply exist, Sophia informs us that Antonia's illness has worsened. Visiting Antonia, the entire right side of her face is now petrified, and it's clear that she probably doesn't have much longer left with us unless we somehow manage to find a cure. Upon speaking with her, she tells us that this giant painting of a woman she's been positioned in front of used to be her, and she asks if there's any resemblance to that beautiful young woman she once was. As established, I'm not fucking heartless, so obviously I'm gonna tell her that she's still beautiful because being nice to people costs nothing. Though if you want something that does cost something, Alidoro's still hanging around and will now sell you the Puppet King King's dope-ass chainsaw scythe, which actually performs really well in addition to looking sick as fuck. And if you're short on some upgrade materials for said scythe, you can stop by Polendina, who coincidentally also has something he'd like to talk to you about and asks to meet in the courtyard to discuss it. So we step out into the rain, where we learn that Polendina's ego has also awoken and he has developed feelings for Antonia, which is honestly super heartwarming. But alas, he is a puppet and he doesn't think that any sort of a relationship between a human and a puppet would ever work out. If only we possessed an item that could help disprove that notion, like this wedding ring that Julian guy told us to keep. Apparently this is all Polendina needs to find hope in the possibility of a relationship, because this dude is jazzed at knowing that there can indeed be a loving relationship between a human and a puppet. Now that we've put a metaphorical smile on Polendina's statuesque face, we can head back to the theater since there's no sign of Geppetto and Eugenie doesn't have anything of value to contribute at the moment. Upon arriving at the theater, you can go check on the red dress lady if you're so inclined, where you'll find a new record that she left for us upon dying. Never gonna say no to more music at the hotel, so we'll take that and move on backstage where we find Geppetto. He tells us that with the Puppet King gone, we can finally reclaim the city and work towards finding a cure for the petrification disease. Awesome. Only lead we have is from the Grand Exhibition, which is where inventors would congregate to show off their new inventions. Go figure. And the only way to get to the Grand Exhibition is through Vanini's old arcade. Not awesome, because now that the puppet frenzy is over, that means the puppets aren't our main threat anymore. Granted, the ones that still remain around the map do attack, but for the most part, we're done with the puppets once we reach the arcade. Now, the majority of our fights will be done against carcasses and their ever-increasing mutations. And as much as I hate fighting these things, I have to admit their designs are cool, and it keeps the game feeling fresh, since we're not just fighting the exact same things over and over again. Plus, the carcasses are a welcome addition in the arcade due to how fucking creepy this location is supposed to be. With everything being shut down or in the process of actively falling apart, it only felt natural to include the not zombies TM, so that the feeling of it being an apocalypse starter zone really gets sold. That being said, I'm not the biggest fan of this level from a gameplay standpoint. It's riddled with shortcuts and switchbacks. We've got ambushes on ambushes due to the confusing claustrophobic nature of the arcade, and we've even got this mini-boss in the basement that kinda sucks to fight since he's mandatory. Granted, he's not too difficult to fight, but still not a fan of making this guy mandatory for progression. But once he's dead, you can continue your underground adventure through this hellscape, complete with a side tunnel filled with death and decay. God, this place fucking blows. On the bright side, we've just got one last cellar to make it through, which wouldn't be a problem if it weren't for this thing. I know I said that I hate the Mad Clown puppet, but I detest the Jester puppets. They hit so hard and attack so randomly with unreal amounts of reach that nowhere felt safe. The only upside is that they've got the potential to be distracted by non-puppet enemies, which is a blessing, since the first time you're introduced to this beast is in a cramped and crowded cellar when he jumps your ass from behind the wine barrels. Thankfully, the carcasses helped out, so I was able to move on and find this wine for that sick old lady. And while we were perusing their finest reds, Vanini somehow managed to crack ergo waves and learned to broadcast his voice through them so that he could tell us about this distress signal he picked up coming from the Grand Exhibition. Might as well check it out since we're already on the way there, and speaking of which, we're here. Welcome to the Grand Exhibition, where the puppets go hard and the aesthetic goes harder. Stunning scenery aside, we make our way through the gardens, which are inhabited by puppets because why wouldn't they be, and make our way inside. Upon entering, we can find even more puppets like these guys who seem to be more useful versions of the Daleks from Doctor Who, as well as these big guys roaming around acting as mini-bosses. Macho Man Randy Savage is here too, strangely enough, but what's stranger is that the distress signal Vanini picked up was from a human, and they're actually alive, which is the surprising part. Her name is Belle, and she's confused about everything going on with the puppets and carcasses. Me too, girl. Let's go talk about it back at the hotel. The King of Riddles makes yet another appearance, and upon solving the riddle, he doesn't simply give you the key this time. Instead, he gives you a clue as to where you can find the key. I love that. It's super in character for him, and I wish they'd done that with the rest of the keys, but I don't think this game contains enough art pieces to make puzzles out of, unfortunately. After a brief tour around the exhibition, we've finally reached the boss room, but before I take on this guy, I've got some errands to run. Totally didn't just forget to give that bottle of wine to the sick old lady who gives you a Vanini coin for it. And now that we have this, we should go back to the hotel where we can hand this necklace I got from the Puppet King to Sophia, who will reminisce on it, which causes our hair to grow? I don't get it, neither does she, but I guess that means we're becoming more human. Oh, also, the painting we brought back to Geppetto has something weird going on with it, so we should go check it out. The nose of the portrait has begun growing because this is still a Pinocchio story and the devs didn't want you to forget that. I appreciate that there's still a nod to the whole nose growing thing without it actually being a direct mechanic of our character, because having the player's nose grow every time they lie would be a bit, for lack of a better term, on the nose. Regardless, Geppetto is confused about the thing growing out of the painting, as am I, so let's head back to the boss fight. This time we are facing off against Victor, the Hand of God. Straight up, this dude rules. He enters the arena like a WWE superstar, drops banger lines during the fight, and if you lose, he dedicates the win to the Arm of God, which I think is tight as fuck. That's not even mentioning his moveset, which can get pretty wild. This dude has legit combos that he'll drop on you if you're not careful, and once his health bar drops to the halfway mark, he gets even more aggressive and starts glowing blue. This might actually be one of my favorite fights in the game. It feels fair, the dialogue goes crazy, it has a certain intensity to it that words won't do justice for, and it's even got two phases without splitting them into separate health bars. If any of the Round 8 devs find themselves watching this video for some reason, I'm begging you, make more bosses like Victor, because I'm all here for it. But sadly, Victor must die, and once he does, we're introduced to Simon Manus. Only took 20-some hours, but we've finally met the main villain of our story. Simon dumps a ton of exposition on us about the origins of Ergo and what its true nature is, revealing that the petrification disease is a process that will turn humans into Ergo to be harvested, I think. There's a chance I've got that wrong, but I'm operating on the assumption that I don't, and this is a fine enough reason for me to want to stop him. He invites us to the Alchemist's Isle and tosses us a key to this locked room in the exhibition. Naturally, we've got to check it out, and once the door opens, we're greeted by Sophia. Apparently, her ergo powers got buffed, and now she can create an illusion of herself in this one specific room, which kinda feels lazy from a narrative standpoint, but hey, at least there's a reason for it. NPC aside, this room contains a fucking sick statue that allows the player to reset their stats and go through the upgrades again in case there's some optimization you'd like to do. If not, you can head back to the hotel to see what's happened while you've been fighting. Belle's here now, and apparently she's one of two soldiers tasked with entering Krat to figure out what the hell happened here. Unfortunately, she lost contact with her partner and asks if we can find him. We'll keep an eye out, but I make no promises. Vanini gives us more info on the Grand Covenant, how it was Geppetto's idea, but he was the one that made it work, how he's unsure why the puppet frenzy even happened, and that all he knows for a fact is that the King of Puppets was involved either as the main culprit or as a means to an end, and I'm not sure which is worse. On one hand, it's terrifying to think that one machine was able to gain enough sentience to control the entire species of puppets, but on the other, how twisted of a person do you need to be in order to cause a puppet uprising to further your own agenda? Guess that's something to think about while we track down Alidoro to give him this glove that Eugenie made for him. Sophia's still here too, and if you talk to her again, she'll give you some more info on her listener powers as well as the nature of Ergo. Turns out, Simon's been fucking around with Ergo and making everything worse for quite some time, and needs to be stopped before he's able to complete his plan of absorbing unholy amounts of Ergo and ascending to godhood. Sounds fun, so let's visit Polendina and gear the fuck up. Except if you talk to Polendina, he informs you of Antonia's worsening condition, which is exactly the type of uplifting news I come here for. Good news is, he drops the tidbit that gold coin fruit may be the only thing that can cure her. Why didn't you just lead with that, man? We've got a whole tree of that shit growing upstairs. So after talking to our stuttery friend and asking him to whip up a cure, we have one. Super easy, barely an inconvenience. Why the hell hasn't this been mass-produced? Anyway, we take the cure back to Polendina, who asks us what to do with it like the answer's not obvious. So after telling him to use the cure to cure Antonia, we are finally able to move on from the grand exhibition to our next adventure with our pals Red Fox and Black Cat. Except the cat's going blind from his illness, so they ask for some of that sweet, sweet gold coin fruit, which seems to just be a magical cure-all MacGuffin growing in our backyard. And since I'm not using it for anything, I might as well give it to them, to which they thanked me by promptly fucking off. Cool, dude, still don't know where I'm going, so it's time to ring up our guy in the chair, Vanini, who seems to be surprised we're calling, but still tells us that if we need to get to the Alchemist's Isle, we'll need to acquire a golden ergo, I guess. Even better, Vanini's already been tracking this thing down for us, which means we just have to go to the Barren Waste. Welcome to the swamp level, you knew it was coming. Just as you'd expect, this whole area is dull, gray, and lifeless, as if Zack Snyder got a hold of the color palette for this specific setting. And after making our way through some dilapidated ruins just to find Alidoro and learn that the swamp yard is also poisonous, I'm ready to get the fuck out of here. We try to give the glove to Alidoro, except it doesn't fit, which is kinda weird, since the reason it doesn't fit is that it's missing a finger. But Eugenie made these gloves specifically for Alidoro because he's missing a finger. I'll have to ask her about that later, but in the meantime, let's find this golden ergo. Though in order to do that, we need to make our way through the no man's land of broken puppets and heavy artillery, since there's some loser atop the tower raining down an amount of missiles that the US military would blush at. Good news though, if you get your timing right, then you'll be able to use the missiles to defeat the enemies you're fighting instead of actually having to fight them. And after clearing the first tower, you get to meet the broken puppet. I love this guy. He's also not bound by the Grand Covenant, except he's just interested in learning about human emotions, which you're able to teach. Sure, it's closer to the blind leading the blind than anything else, but if you've got the clap, laugh, angry, and sad emotes, then he ends up being incredibly grateful and gives you some quartz. He also refers to you as his first friend and says he'll never forget you, which managed to thaw my frigid heart because robots feeling things will never fail to hurt me. I took a quick break to visit the hotel again and spend my quartz, but also swung by Eugenie's shop to tell her about the gloves. Turns out it's her first time making something that doesn't kill people, and after hearing that, I didn't have the heart to tell her that Alidoro didn't like them, so I lied, and don't look at me like that, you would too. I guess Alidoro lost his finger through the efforts of saving Eugenie and her family from the collapse of the workshop tower a while back, so I'll have to ask him about that later. Back to the swamp, where we now need to navigate yet another no man's land, missiles still included. But this time there's two puppets of the future roaming around, meaning I'm not fighting anything until I take out those missiles. Unless it's this secret boss fight against the Owl Doctor who believes living is an illness and wishes to cleanse the world of its disease. It's an interesting motive with horrible execution that deserves execution, so execution delivered. And with that guy off our backs, we can continue onwards through this old mineshaft filled with puppet part balls instead of minecarts. Never gonna complain about an Indiana Jones segment though, so after some careful maneuvering, I got baited by a false floor. So I made my way back up just to be met with the fucking giant baby puppet. Aside from being haunting to look at, this thing's moveset is super weird and I just don't enjoy fighting them, so I refuse to spend any more time than necessary talking about it. Meaning we're moving on to clearing out the second tower, which is easy enough despite some top tier bait. Upon leaving the second tower, we're subjected to an earthquake that Jiminy is able to pinpoint at the Krot Central Station somehow, which adds yet another thing to our list to check on later. We also get to meet Hugo, Alidoro's biggest simp. And by talking to him, we can learn that he's been planning his route to follow in Alidoro's footsteps and hopefully meet the legendary hunter one day. He also called me riffraff and showed us this wanted poster that he calls slander but I call suspicious. Time for a boss fight. Not against Hugo, he's chill. I'm talking about the swamp monster. This is easily my least favorite boss in the whole fucking game. I actually loathe this thing. Not only is the arena for this boss the smallest one we've gotten, but this mean green fighting machine flails around like nobody's business, which makes the attacks difficult to read with all the tentacles. There's a joke there, I'm sure, but I'm too annoyed at this boss to think of it. And to top it off, this motherfucker has a second phase for some reason. It commandeers a broken puppet to continue the smackdown, and this is where I drew the line. It's one thing to throw a second phase into a boss fight every now and then, but ever since the Fallen Archbishop, it just feels like every other boss is a two-phase fight with separate health bars for no reason. I could understand there being a second phase for the Archbishop. I was fine with the second phase for the Puppet King, but why does the Swamp Monster need a second phase? I guess its second phase cutscene sets up the zombified puppets that we'll see in the following sections, but since we're killing this thing, why are there so many puppets affected by this? There's just not much of an explanation for it aside from damn, shit's crazy and Krot, so the second phase just ends up feeling like a way to prolong an already obnoxious fight. Because of course, this boss can also afflict you with the decay status effect, which it's able to stack like a motherfucker due to how quick its attacks are. And once you've got the decay status applied, both your health and weapon durability begin to drain over time. So now you've got to find the time to pop an item to take away the decay effect, but there's almost never any time to do so with how small the arena is and how quickly the boss can cross it. This is the only other boss fight where I used the summon feature, and if that makes me a bitch, then I'm a bitch, dude. Out of every fight in this playthrough, this is easily the longest one, with the runtime for this single fight rivaling the runtime of this video. If there's anything I missed from this boss fight story-wise, I'd love to learn about it in the comments, because there's no chance in hell I'm ever fighting this thing again. But once you finally killed it, Alidoro shows up to take all the credit, dubs us Alidoro's best bait, and proceeds to fuck off to the hotel after giving us the golden ergo. Naturally, I followed him straight back to the hotel because he'd been hyping up the treasure that this monster was supposedly guarding, and I'm dying to see it. Turns out the treasure is a fucking katana, which immediately became my favorite weapon in the entire game, purely due to how unique it is compared to everything else. The light attack functions as normal, but the real bread and butter with this thing is the heavy attacks. If you make a heavy attack while holding the left stick in any specific direction, you'll make the attack but also spin in the direction you're moving, which means if you get the timing right, you can dodge attacks while still dealing damage. And the cherry on top is that the charged heavy attack can parry attacks while charging. I swear this thing is a game changer. I also showed Alidoro the wanted poster, and he told me that it's slanderous propaganda from some journalist that hates him, so case closed, I suppose. In happier news, Antonia's been cured. Yay. You can also play the piano for her if you're in the mood for a cute little moment, which I obviously did, and then we're able to get back to our journey. Talking to Belle gives us the objective of checking out Krot Central Station to see if we can find her partner, but the normal way to Krot Central that we used to reach the hotel is closed off. Weird, so let's see if we can find another way there. Heading back to the Swamp Monster's den, we can talk to Hugo again and give him the update that Alidoro wouldn't bribe a journalist. But Hugo tells us that Alidoro and that journalist are friends, so it doesn't make sense that this guy would just randomly slander Alidoro's name. Weird, huh? Anyway, let's see what's on the other side of that arena. Holy shit, it's a tunnel to Krot Central Station, that's convenient. Except instead of puppets, it's now overrun by carcasses and decay. Lovely. Sophia taps into her ergo communication powers to tell us there's something going on here that's amplifying the effects of ergo, mutating it beyond anything we've ever seen before. Hence why we're now fighting giant carcass scorpions, which are annoying as hell due to the rock carapace coating their legs that we can't get through until it's broken. But the only way to break it is by hitting it, and hitting it staggers you. I hate this mechanic. We did find Atkinson, Belle's partner, though. Unfortunately, he's been taken by whatever the fuck happened here, meaning he's going to become a carcass at some point. He gives us a letter and asks us to put him out of his misery, and I'm not going to deny a man his mercy killing. I am going to read that letter though, and fuck, he and Belle are in love. R.I.P. my boy Atkinson, he was a real one. And now we've got to make our way through the tutorial area again, except it's now all blue and run down. There's also someone wearing a weasel mask here, and naturally they're here for another humanoid boss fight. I'll applaud them for making this character's moveset feel weaselly, for lack of a better term, but at the end of the day, it's just another fight against a human, meaning they'll go down just as easily as the rest. But upon killing the weasel, we learn that they're just a kid looking for food. Not sure why they immediately resorted to violence, but I guess this is supposed to be a moment where we're meant to question what we're doing here. Odd placement for it, but cool, I guess. Well, time to exit the station. What kind of earthquake hit here, dude? We've got demonic dogs running around giving off the disruption aura, puppets possessed by tentacles even though we killed the giant tentacle monster, and disruption crystals sprouting out of the ground. Feels like a lore-accurate London by this point, with how many dark alleys and sharp objects we keep running into, and with how fucked the infrastructure is now, the only way back to the hotel is through a detour that'll take us to the workshop tower and introduce us to new enemies. If you're wondering why we can't just fast travel to the hotel via Stargazer, that's because the Stargazer network is also fucked along with the city. So after that detour and climbing the tower where we get to meet dudes with canes and some pyromaniacs, we eventually reach the top for another boss fight. Sadly, this boss fell victim to my dope-ass katana skills and didn't stand a chance. I will say that the idea of having the boss split into two was interesting, but with how weak the duplicate was, this fight didn't do much for me. So after killing this boss and crashing the elevator to the ground floor, Sophia contacts us to explain the whole Stargazer debacle, and this is where we learn that Simon can also communicate to us through ergo waves. He shit-talks you a bit, leaves, and now it's actually time to get back to the hotel. Right after we get this riddle from the King of Riddles. Love that guy. After leaving us with an interesting question pertaining to ergo, we can finally fight the corrupted puppet master, aka the first boss, except this time he's got the goop. I believe his moveset is a bit different this time around, except now he can apply decay and spawn little dudes mid-fight, which would be annoying if they didn't go down so easily. Overall, it's not a bad fight, and in terms of reusing boss designs, I don't mind this since the devs did something to make it feel different enough from the first time we fought this thing. And with the big guy defeated, we can finally reach the hotel, for real this time. So we enter, and surprise, surprise, shit's fucked here too. The lobby's trashed, none of the NPCs are in their usual spots except Sophia, and there's a giant banner that reads hypocrite hung up as some sort of ominous gesture. Sophia tells us that the hotel was attacked and that she believes Simon was behind it, which is just another reason for us to actually stop this guy. The rest of the crew is holed up in Geppetto's office, except Geppetto because he's been kidnapped. Eugenie thanks us for saving her life, even though we showed up after all the fighting and didn't do anything to save anybody, but I've picked up a few lessons from Alidoro, so I'm happy to take credit for this. Venini also thanks us, which is nice of him, and Antonia gives us a way to reach the Alchemist's Isle. Turns out she's got a key to some sort of hidden underground passage we can take to reach our destination, but I'm forgetting the proper phrase for it. I think it's something like Secret Tunnel! Upon reaching the second most beautiful underground landscape I've seen in a video game, we're greeted with this giant puppet come to kick our ass a la Kool-Aid Man, and upon winning that fight we can continue onwards toward the King of Riddles' underground phone line. Not sure how this one works, but you know what, I'm rocking with it. And after a bit of resource gathering, it's time for yet another boss fight. The Black Rabbit Brotherhood is back for revenge, and they've pulled up with their dead brother's casket as a reminder of the transgressions we've committed against them. However, the gimmick this time isn't that you're fighting one of them with the others periodically jumping in. Instead, you're fighting all three remaining members at the same time, and somehow it doesn't feel overwhelming. Despite the arena not being the biggest and having two more bosses than usual, the Brotherhood still gives you room to breathe, with one of them focusing on you until one of the others decides to jump in for a quick gank attack before taking over as your main opponent. It's probably one of my favorite gank fights in a Souls-like purely from a gameplay standpoint. Since all the members have different movesets and weapons, this feels like a great test of your skills, seeing as you need to be able to adapt their different styles on the fly whenever they decide to switch. It's Skelter without the Helter, if you will. And the cherry on top is that the big guy's coffin isn't just here as a set piece. Once you've got the last member down to their last bit of health, the eldest brother bursts free via afterlife technology, enraged at what you've done to his siblings. Although this time he's got some new attacks that are buffed by Ergo and bring a breath of fresh air to the fight as well as his lungs. However, we quickly rip that air back from his lungs as we finally kill all members of the Brotherhood. And as we progress onwards, who should we find down here but our dear old friend Alidoro? Upon speaking with him, we can learn that he's the one responsible for the attack on the hotel. What a bastard. We also learned that, shocker, he's not the real Alidoro. Instead, he's Alidoro's old partner, Parrot, who was focused more on turning a profit rather than simply helping people like the real Alidoro is. Or was, I suppose. Turns out this guy ended up selling a bunch of their artifacts in order to pay some bills, which sparked an argument between him and Alidoro, which ended with Parrot killing Alidoro and stealing his identity. Sounds fitting, scummy as it may be, and as much as I'd love to kill him, I've gotta keep him around so that I can keep buying dope-ass weapons. Although I should say that on my first playthrough, I did kill him cause fuck this guy. However, he does tell us that Geppetto's been taken by the Fox and Cat to the Alchemist's Isle via submarine, meaning we now know how to get our dad back. But before that, we should probably make sure there's nothing anybody back at the hotel needs us to do, which Venini does. He's finally solved the whole Ergo wavelength thing, and it turns out that the puppets were still obeying the Grand Covenant at the time of the frenzy, but were communicating one message from the Puppet King between all of them via Ergo waves. But one line stuck out. That line is, Law Zero, the creator's name is Geppetto, meaning that Geppetto is the one who caused the puppet frenzy. Upon making this revelation, we are given the choice of whether or not to tell Venini, which I obviously do so that we can discuss this as intellectuals. By which I mean we listen to the funny Italian man ponder why in the world Geppetto would cause the puppet frenzy, to which we have no explanation at the moment, but this does cause Venini to reminisce on the murder of his parents as a child. However, this time he reveals to us that his parents weren't just murdered by some some random mugger. They were murdered by a puppet. Big Puppet doesn't want you to know that puppets can kill people though, so they told the public that it was just some criminal. And it wasn't just any random puppet either. This one's significant. The puppet that murdered Venini's parents was Arlecchino, who we now know as the King of Riddles. I'd give a spoiler warning, but if you're still listening this far in, that's on you. I've gotta say, I was genuinely surprised at this reveal when it happened because I wasn't actually expecting them to connect these two characters. Sure, it feels fitting and maybe a bit obvious in hindsight, but the best twists always are, aren't they? After dropping this bomb on us, Venini gives us the decoder he used to figure out the ergo stuff and tells us that we should listen to the Puppet King's message in full. So we walk over to the Stargazer, whip out that decoder, and press play. This message is specifically to us from the Puppet King, recounting memories he has from growing up with us, the player character, in the Monad Charity House. We were apparently best friends, and he never actually wanted to fight us. He'd even tried to send messengers to tell us this, except we killed them. But in my defense, I didn't know they were messengers. After learning something about our past, I was left wondering why Geppetto never told us any of this information, since it sounds like it could have been useful. Maybe we can ask him once we free him, so let's go do that. We head back to the tunnels, commandeer a sub, and ghost ride that bitch into the sand, washing up on the shore of the Alchemist's Isle. Upon emerging from the submersible, the first person we meet is Sophia, since I suppose her projection powers allow her to be here for us now. But after she informs us that this isle is where her real body has been kept the whole time, it starts to make a bit more sense. She also asks us to give her peace when we do find her body, which you can interpret however you want for the time being. This is also when we learn that Sophia's father was a man named Valentinus, who was coincidentally the leader of the alchemists. It seems like Simon, the guy who we're here for, was the right-hand man for Valentinus and got a bit overly ambitious, spreading the petrification disease to fuel his nefarious plans. So in order to stop this, Sophia locked the fuck in with her ergo powers and began manipulating time? Sure, dude, whatever. Let's go find that body. We begin our trek across the shores of the Alchemist's Isle, and along the way we are shown visions in Ergo that tell us a tale of two boys growing up desperate to become stalkers. They attempt to learn swordplay from a local stalker, but are refused, so boys being boys, they attempt to teach themselves and then use their newly learned skills to try and stop a crime or something. This results in one of the boys dying because the actual stalkers weren't able to reach them in time. I'm assuming the boy that died is Carlo, Geppetto's son, which means we've finally established a reason for Geppetto creating us in case you weren't familiar with the source material. And as much as I'd like to speculate as to what that means for the game's story, we've got a fortress to breach guarded by 4 missile launchers and a couple scorpion carcasses. Lovely. So after a bit of careful maneuvering, the base of the tower is finally cleared out, meaning we can actually enter the damn thing. As soon as we get past this boss fight with the Door Guardian, there's not much to say about this one. It's a pretty short fight overall. The gimmick is that your attacks deal minimal damage unless you go and bite this one specific ankle, which, after receiving enough damage, will open up the boss for a fatality attack that chunks like half its health bar. Do that a couple times and you receive the Alchemist badge, which allows you to open the door so that we can begin our ascent. And boy oh boy, what a fucking gauntlet this climb is. If you're not on a ladder, you're in combat. If you're not in combat, you're climbing a ladder. And if you're not doing either, then odds are you're respawning. I jest, of course, for the reality is that if you're not in combat or climbing a ladder, then you're most likely walking into an ambush or walking into a trap. Don't get it twisted, those are two different things. One requires enemies, the other requires geometry. But don't worry, because once you've reached the top, that means it's time to climb all the way back down so you can reach the actual top. I've gotta be honest, I'm getting sick of this trend in games of going downwards just to climb back up to an even higher point. Can we stop doing that? There's no reason for it to be a trope outside of prolonging a level, at least no reason that I can think of off the top of my head. But the bright side of coming down here is that we finally get to meet Arlecchino, provided you've been exploring. And when you find him, he's just a broken puppet tied up in a mess of cables that seemingly allow him to broadcast his voice across various telephones and crot. Speaking with him provides us with one last riddle, which is really just an A or B question. Are you a puppet or are you a human? Which poses a very interesting question outside of the game in regards to what it actually means to be human. Because if everything about you inside and out is made of metal, yet you're able to think and you're able to feel, what are you? But we'll talk about that later, once we're done with the story. If you'd like, you can question Arlecchino further to learn that the way he's able to make these phone calls is by tapping into Sophia's ergo, siphoning a bit of her power in order to broadcast his voice to whichever landline he wants. Kinda like the annoying neighbor you keep catching hooking himself up to your power grid so he can prank call the homies. We also learned that Arlecchino is indeed a serial killer and that he gets a strange sense of joy from killing, even going as far to symbolize himself as an artist of blood rather than a murderer. His character feels like a combination between the Riddler and Zsasz from Batman's Rogues Gallery, which is a combination that just works for some reason. Going back to the artist of blood thing, Arlecchino considers Vanini to be his greatest masterpiece, his magnum opus, for he killed Vanini's parents out of nothing but sheer curiosity. After bragging about his pride and joy, he hands us a toy of a moon with a missile in its eye that used to belong to Vanini before we pull out the sword and rock his shit. With the King of Riddles now dead, I headed back to the hotel to see what Vanini had to say about all this. After handing him the toy, he reminisces about the night his parents had shown him this film and he'd asked them to make a toy based off the moon, which they did. That night sparked his love for inventing, and he can't help but wonder if things would have been different had he never seen that movie or had never asked his parents to build him this toy. Regardless, he thanks us for finally giving him closure over that tragic night, and Pulcinella thanks us as well before dropping the absolute bombshell that his ego's been awakened since Vanini was a child. I don't have time to unpack all of that though, so we head back to the tower where we find Subject 826 at the bottom of a different elevator. He's been held on this island while the alchemists ran experiments on him and almost refuses to talk to us because he thinks we're going to force him to consume ergo. After informing him that we're in fact not evil and here to save him, he's quite happy and says he's going back to Krat somehow, and maybe we can meet him there. Wholesome, but I've still got a whole ass tower to climb. And so we continue climbing until we reach this room where the black cat is placed in our path. His illness is getting worse, and he asks for yet another gold coin fruit. Now, on my first playthrough, I obliged and handed one over, to which he let me pass. But in New Game Plus, I really wanted to see what happened by refusing, to which the answer is a boss fight. And while the cat's spear packs quite a punch, he's still human and still going blind, but these hands are under an equal opportunity contract, meaning the blind kid can catch a beat down with the rest of them. Upon defeating the cat, we continue onwards to yet another elevator that takes us higher up the wall, where we can resume our never-ending climb. Except now the inside area is designed in a labyrinthian manner to keep you confused and wandering around until you stumble upon the proper path. And after what feels like literal ages, we finally reach the apex of our ascent, where we find nothing but a lone stargazer, a broken tablet, and a door. Welcome to the potentially penultimate boss fight against Lexacia the Complete. She showed up earlier with Simon to put a spear through Victor's chest, and now she's here to put that spear through our chest to keep us away from Simon. Heavily armored and bending the Tempest to her will, she charges you down with attacks that are relatively easy to parry, but her combos go on long enough to feel like it's more of an endurance test. I will praise the fight for really leaning into the whole heavily armored thing by giving her attacks that gradually pick up speed after each one to carry that sense of weight and momentum, implying that after a few swings, she's not even trying to attack us anymore, she's just simply letting her own force do the fighting for her. I also thought it was a nice touch that the shield plate thing on her back will make your weapons ping off of it if you clip it, but it can be broken through enough brute force. I've got to be honest, it's a fairly grueling fight that kicked my ass for a while, and upon triumphing over this heavily armored lightning lass, I wept tears of joy, which were quickly turned to tears as she began stripping the armor from her body in preparation for a second phase. And while I've griped about unnecessary second phases, this one's different. It feels fitting, it looks sick, and best of all, it's actually a good fight. Her second phase goes crazy. She initiates by leaping into the air and throwing bolts of lightning at us. And while dodging definitely works here, Round 8 leaned into that Sekiro inspiration and gave you the ability to parry the fucking lightning. It's so cool, dude. If you've ever watched Naruto, then you'll know what I mean when I say that Lexacia's second phase is when she dropped the weights and let her full power through. She can close the gap between her and the player within the blink of an eye. She hits just as hard, if not harder, and the intensity of her attacks just keeps ramping up. From the standpoint of spectacle alone, I'm not sure anything in the game beats this fight for me. From start to finish, it's just an incredible encounter. It feels like what FromSoft was going for in their Melania boss fight without the bullshit YouTube combo. By the time I finished the fight, my heart was racing and it felt like I could finally start breathing again, even though I hadn't noticed I was holding my breath near the end. And after that fight, I needed a breather, so I hopped back to the hotel again, only to find out that Antonia's passed away. She'd left us a cherry-scented letter and a record, with the letter reading as follows. To the gentleman who gave my precious time back to me, that time I met you was light itself. Whether you're that child or not, I think you're a kind, precious child. Thank you for giving my joy back to me in my last moments. Which honestly kinda hit me, I won't lie. Now, obviously, we need to talk with Polendina since, he was in love with Antonia, and he's not doing so well, to the point where he's going to factory reset himself in order to avoid the grief. Feels a bit like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind to me, but I get it. Polendina's just a puppet. He wasn't built to handle all these human emotions that came with an awakened ego, so I can see why he'd want to revert back to that mindless husk he was before, rather than attempting to process his feelings. He thanks us for everything we'd taught him, and lets us return to the island where we can continue onwards. Upon reaching the other end of the bridge, we open the door where we find Sophia's real body covered in this massive solidified ergo. It's pretty clear that her use of ergo-based powers has been taking its toll for quite some time, and all that remains is the upper half of her body. We're given the choice to leave her alive or give her peace, and considering she'd asked us for peace, I'm happy to oblige after seeing what's become of her. And upon relinquishing Sophia from this mortal realm, we can get back to climbing, baby! Woo! Let's fucking go! Same shit, different tower, so I won't elaborate on the journey any further. Once we've reached the top of this tower, we find the Red Fox. She assures us that Geppetto is safe, but considering we killed her brother earlier, it's time for another boss fight. Which is just as easy as the rest of the humanoid bosses, so there's not much to say here. We defeat her and move on to free Geppetto, who will give us the key to continue climbing after we answer a simple question for him. Was he a good father? Between both of my playthroughs, I chose different options, and I haven't noticed a difference in the outcome aside from his direct response to you. Either way, he still gives you the key, meaning we can continue onwards to the top of this tower. And after spending a bit of time taking in the view, I steeled myself up for what can either be our final or penultimate boss fight against Simon Manus. Ascending the stairs, we see Simon sitting atop his tower, grotesquely mutated after consuming egregious amounts of ergo. See, Simon's entire motivation for what he's doing stems from the fact that he was born with the ability to read minds. And for as long as he can remember, he's hated the concept of lying. So by consuming as much ergo as he has, his hope is that he can ascend to godhood and create a world free of lies. Though the game doesn't outright tell you this, it's all learned via readable text that you can find around the tower in classic Souls-like fashion. So if you haven't done the required reading, a lot of what Simon does may not make sense on a surface level, but I assure you he does have his motivations. And obviously, we don't want one man to become the god of his own world, so let's fight him. Simon begins by ripping the cloth from his body to reveal that one side of him has grown into a gigantic, ergo-filled, tumor-like mass, which he uses to wield a giant club to beat the shit out of you. He's not terribly difficult to fight, with his combos being fairly short but hitting hard as I'm sure you can imagine. It gives off the sense that in his current form, he's not really that strong. In fact, he seems tired, confined by the restraints of his mortal form while whatever he's attempting to ascend to yearns to break free. And once you bring that health bar to 0, it does. Entering his second phase, Simon Manus, Hand of God. He begins his ascension by recreating that one religious painting that I'm sure you're all familiar with before locking the fuck in and blitzing you with a barrage of disruption attacks, AoE moves, and highly damaging attacks with his club. Hell, sometimes he'll even call down the literal Hand of God to touch the floor and create a massive shockwave to ruin your flow in the off chance you can't make it to the other end of the arena. Now, as for the spectacle factor, this fight's absolutely cooking here. Entering the second phase feels like a Jujutsu Kaisen domain expansion. The music hits you with everything the composer had, but there's just something that doesn't work for me. And I think it's Simon himself, strangely enough. The way he fights just doesn't feel fun to me, and as hard as I've tried, I can't place my finger on why. Upon defeating him, I wasn't hit with that sense of satisfaction that most bosses evoke in these kinds of games. It felt strangely underwhelming conquering the next coming of Christ, which is a sentence I never thought I'd be saying in a video about Pinocchio. But maybe that's what the devs were going for. At least, I hope that's what they were going for, because if it isn't, then I really think this fight would have benefited from introducing Simon way earlier in the narrative rather than at the tail end of chapter 7 of 11. Building him up as a looming threat closer to the start, or maybe even having him show up to help us for a while before betraying the hotel for his own selfish reasons, could have made for a much more compelling character. Instead, he just feels like another power-hungry dude that wouldn't have had anything to do with us had we not shown up at the Grand Exhibition. At least when you defeat him, you're able to talk to him for a moment before he passes away. He'll ask you what you've done with Sophia, and this is the first time your choice quite literally doesn't matter. Since Simon can read minds, it doesn't matter if you lie to him or not because he already knows what you've done with her. Again, I think he could have been a way more compelling character if he'd been part of the cast from the jump. Imagine talking to him over the course of your adventures, picking dialogue options to lie to him if you need to, just to learn later on that every time you lied to Simon, he knew. Squandered potential aside, Simon warns us to beware of Geppetto before finally croaking and giving us the arm of God along with an elevator in the center of the floor. Assuming he was the final boss, I hopped on the elevator where, upon reaching the bottom, Geppetto awaited me. You know, the guy Simon just told us to be wary of. And this is where you're given the most important choice in the game. Geppetto reveals that this entire time, we've simply been a vessel for him to bring his dead son Carlo back to life. He's kept a puppet made from his body in a box, and the only thing missing for him to bring his precious boy back is our heart. Meaning we now have the choice to give up our heart for our creator's greatest desires, or refuse the man who made us what we are today. If you refuse, then Geppetto whips out an ergo glove and activates the puppet for the final boss fight, the Nameless Puppet. Now, on my first playthrough, I got waxed by this thing so hard that I immediately turned around and gave up my heart to Geppetto so that I could finish the game, since I didn't have the energy for another boss fight. Doing this, however, nets you the bad ending, where upon sacrificing yourself, you get a cutscene where you and Geppetto exit the hotel after you've slaughtered all your allies. What the actual fuck, dude? I get that it's supposed to be the evil ending since you're siding with the villain, but what reason does Geppetto have for you to kill everyone at the hotel? I guess he didn't want any witnesses to what he'd done. At least that's the only thing I can think of that makes sense. Either way, the game successfully made me feel like a piece of shit for choosing the bad ending, so this time I endured the fight against the Nameless Puppet. When the fight starts off, he's fairly easy to read, which is most likely due to being controlled by Geppetto. All the attacks are very well telegraphed, his sword hits hard but swings slow as if he's not used to the weight, and just as quickly as it started, it ended. You chop off the head of the Nameless Puppet, and then that's where it picks up with the second phase. And while this marks the third boss in a row split up into two separate health bars, I still don't mind it as this is, in fact, the final fight. With the puppet's head cut off, Geppetto no longer has control over its actions, meaning it can attack us completely unrestricted, and hang on a second, this motherfucker's dual-wielding. Straight up, this second phase elevates the Nameless Puppet fight to my favorite fight in the game. The music smacks, his attacks are so fluid and exceptionally flashy, which creates this sense of spectacle only rivaled by Lexacia. None of its moves are terribly difficult to read, and during the fight, you'll be hit with voice lines from your companions to remind you who you're doing all of this for. It's just so fucking good, dude. My words can't do it justice. It's one of those fights where you've got to play it to know what I'm talking about. And at the end of the fight, a cutscene plays where you're disarmed and the puppet prepares to strike you through the heart in order to finish this fight and cement itself as Geppetto's son. But upon seeing this, it sparks something within Geppetto to act. And so he throws himself in front of the sword, taking the death blow so that we may live. Sure, Geppetto's sacrificing himself for seemingly selfish reasons, but after the puppet removes the sword and we strike it down, Carlo cradles Geppetto in his arms, and Geppetto looks up into his son's eyes where he sees a single tear fall, causing a smile to take over as he breathes his last breath, knowing that this puppet has defied its purpose of being a vessel and truly becoming human. We then cut to a new scene of Carlo overlooking Krot from atop the tower before he removes the ergo from his mechanical heart in order to transfer it to a puppet version of Sophia. Not sure where he got this or how he made it, but we'll go with it. And once the ergo is absorbed, Carlo collapses into her arms as Sophia's new body takes its first breath while cradling him. The camera pans back and we see the two characters in a pose that resembles the statue of the Saintess before fading to black and rolling the credits. And this is where I'd end the summary, except we've got a Marvel-esque post-credits scene where it opens on someone sitting in a train car making a phone call. Turns out our stuttering alchemist friend Giangio is actually named Paracelsus, and he's working with a secret organization that hunts down characters from children's books, I guess? Oh, he was also faking the stutter too, so fuck this guy, honestly. And while I'm not sure what he's up to, the scene closes with a teaser for what could potentially be their next game based on The Wizard of Oz, because Dorothy shows up along the rooftops of Krat with her trademark ruby slippers before clicking her heels 3 times and finally ending the game. By which I mean it sends you back to Carlo's body because everyone in the hotel has something to say to you. If you track down Alidoro in the tunnels, you can buy the nameless puppet sword, which is actually my favorite weapon in this game now due to how sick the moveset is, but that's not what we're talking about. Alidoro is actually surprised you survived the whole aisle, go figure. Wish I could still kill him, but it seems I've missed the opportunity. Back at the hotel, Eugenie says that it's nice to feel hopeful about something again. Vanini thanks us for stopping what he's calling the Krot Crisis, fitting name honestly. Belle says that she's going to continue living in honor of her fallen partner Atkinson, which is a nice sentiment. We can also play the piano like a goddamn savant now, though I can't help but wish that Antonia was still around to hear it. Oh, and the best part is, if you've lied enough and become human enough, you can hold the cat. 10 out of 10 game of the fucking year, dude. And if you wander back into Geppetto's office, the thing growing from the portrait has completed, meaning you can take it as a weapon titled The Golden Lie. Bit on the nose, for lack of a better term, but the weapon isn't the only reason we're up here. On Geppetto's desk, there's a letter from Sophia who thanks us for giving her a second chance at life. How sweet. And with that, we've finally reached the end of the game. So if you just came here to see what I thought of the story, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I do believe some things could have been written better, though I do think a lot of what I'd consider subpar in the writing can be chalked up to the translation not being the best. Unfortunately, I'm not sure which language this game should be played in to get the full experience, so if you know, feel free to tell me in the comments. Critically, I think I'd give this game a 9 out of 10, but for me, personally, it's perfect. Something about it just really resonated with me, and as far as a Souls-like game goes, this one is easily the best out of all of them. However, this wouldn't be one of my videos if I didn't keep going on about the themes within the game after extensively summarizing the story, so if you've got some extra time, here we go. A while back, I mentioned how Arlecchino's final riddle poses the question of what it means to be human, and I'd like to dive deeper into that. I posed the question, if all your parts, inside and out, are made of metal, yet you're still able to think and feel, then what are you? Because I'd like to think that you're human, and some of you may agree with me, and if you don't, please, let me know. This might be the only time someone on YouTube asks you to argue with them in the comments, so seize the opportunity. But this is all just to say that got me thinking, what does it mean to be human? Because if you want to get scientific about it, Wikipedia defines humans as anything classed under the Homo sapiens species. That's a pretty limiting answer, and to be honest, it's kind of fucking boring too. I'd rather talk about the things that actually define us and try to figure out what human means beyond a species classification. So I started thinking about it a bit more, specifically in regards to Lies of P. Because the game is so heavy-handedly philosophical in nature, it only made sense to turn my attention towards the teachings of philosophy. But I only took one course on that and then dropped out of college, so I went with the next best option, which was to ask my friends and family. So over the course of about a month, I sent out a message to as many people as I could think of that I figured would answer me back, and asked them all what they thought it meant to be human. I will now either read their answers verbatim or paraphrase if necessary, and give my opinions on said answers while attempting to link it back to the game. So if you're one of those people that provided an answer for me, this is probably the part you came for, and I know I probably said it in messages, but thank you for taking the time to write these out for me. I know it's a weird question to get asked on some fucking Tuesday, so I appreciate you guys for taking the time to actually respond to it. And in no particular order, I'm starting with my girlfriend, simply because she's the first person I asked, and I live with her. We've had like 20 conversations about this by now, and what her answer always came back around to was the desire to understand. One of the main subjects our conversations focused on was our dog, Pumpkin. She doesn't understand much outside of the words treat or ride, but she's a dog. She doesn't have to understand stuff like why she needs to lick everything she sees, or why she needs to shit along the north-south axis, but she does it anyway. Humans, for the most part, are a lot different, though. Whenever we come across something that doesn't immediately make sense, there's an almost primal urge to know everything about it if we're interested enough. That's not to say every person is like this. I'm sure you've asked a question before just to be met with the abysmal answer of, I don't know, that's just how it is. And for some, maybe that's a good enough answer, but I'm willing to bet that for a lot of you, myself included, something about that answer always felt inherently wrong. Like, yeah, I know that the sky is blue because I can look outside and fucking see it. I wanted to know why it was blue and not some other color. Do you think dogs ever wonder why the sky is blue? I don't think they do, at least not most of them. There's a whole subgenre of people teaching their dogs to communicate that I'd rather not get into right now since this video is already long enough as is, and that's just a second can of worms to sort through. Long story short, look up Bunny the dog if you'd like to know more about that. I'm just trying to say that there's an innate desire within humans to understand things, and yet I'm not sure there's much of an example of that within Lies of P. Everything there is to understand is found because somebody else told you to go figure it out so that they could understand it. The puppet frenzy, the petrification disease, we don't learn about those because of Carlo's own curiosity. We learn about them because Geppetto or Vanini told us to go see what was happening. This might just be due to Carlo being a voiceless protagonist in order for the player to have an easier time projecting themselves onto the character. But if this game were to take a more FromSoft approach to it via making the NPCs into speaking cryptics, I'm not sure how compelled I would have been to actually go figure these things out on my own. And this ties in nicely with an answer I received from my friend Mental, who makes incredibly cool things, so you should go check out his link in the description. But to paraphrase his answer, being human is knowingly being lost, yet trying to control as much as possible, questioning every road taken, questioning what lies at the end of the road. I've put his answer up on the screen so you can read the full thing if you'd like, and I highly recommend that you do. He makes some connections back to the game, even going as far as to comment on how Carlo never makes his own choices, we make them. I can't express just how much I love this answer, not just because of how well thought out it is, but because of how he links it back to the game. The idea that within this story, Carlo's actions won't make him any more human since he's being controlled by us, the player. Showing emotions not because he genuinely feels them, but because we pressed a specific button to make him show emotion. Constantly repeating the Krot gauntlet every time we have the desire to play through the game again, yearning for a new experience. Forever shackling him to a life of puppetry where he serves no purpose outside of the one he was expressly designed for. Use RoboArm. But on a real note, I do find the implication that the answer to the question of what it means to be human is to not know fucking hilarious on a fundamental level, and you can't tell me that it isn't. Sure, chalking the answer up to IDK bro is a bit of a cop-out, but it's fascinating to see how people arrived at that conclusion, which is why I'm incredibly grateful for Mental providing his insights and linking it back to the game instead of just rambling on and hoping that it sounds coherent. Kind of like my friend Mills. In his defense, I asked him this question at like 11 p.m. on a work night, and he wrote back within 10 minutes. Now, his original answer to what it means to be human was, and I quote, featherless biped. While he's not technically wrong, and while I do appreciate the callback to an old philosophy joke that totally flew over my head at first, I was wanting a bit more. So he graciously provided me with the following. We can't truly describe man because we don't even understand ourselves. We all have different things that we describe as human, but we can't truly define the word in its entirety. So I can't say what it means to be human, but if something made up of non-human genetics can communicate and understand me and empathize with me, we are largely similar even if they were created as something else. If they have gained the intelligence and wherewithal to properly understand the world as we do, or to even greater heights than we do, they can be considered equal or greater, if not human. Why have you made me go on this tangent? And since I can actually answer that last bit, it's because I wanted to know what my homies think, sue me. But as for the rest, I've had a bit of trouble finding a concrete answer or idea to build off of. So congrats, man. I know your intention here was to make me suffer as I parsed through this, and by God, you've done a fantastic job. The only tangible text that I could find was within that last paragraph where he talks about how something made up of non-human genetics could be considered human so long as it's able to communicate, understand, and empathize. And since I'm not too fond of repeating myself, I'll just say that my dog can communicate her needs to me, my Amazon speaker can understand me when I give it commands, and my dog has empathy, so we can be done here. Thanks again, Mills, you were a massive help. And since I'm getting a bit dismissive now, I might as well get the shortest response out of the way, which comes from my best friend Angel. She posits that the only thing unique about us is the ability to destroy everything we touch. Nihilistic as it sounds, I can see her point. One day, some Italian sailed off in search of seasoning and accidentally put an entire race of people on reserved land. We've been destroying shit since the first Neanderthal clicked some rocks together and made fire. But it's not really unique to us, is it? Beavers will ruin entire ecosystems simply because they feel the need to build dams. Dogs will destroy their toys because they've got a compulsion to, not because they want to. Couldn't be mine, but I just wanted another reason to put a picture of her on the screen, so let's move on. I'm honestly not sure what to call him. Boss, contractor, acquaintance. Fuck it, level 1 friend. My level 1 friend Fallout actually gave me an answer tangentially similar to Angel's, and this is the best segue I could think of. And you may be asking yourselves, how and why did this channel with 300 subs get a big name Destiny creator to give an answer for this long ass video? And I'm right there with you. I'll be fully transparent, I wasn't expecting Fallout to give an answer. Sure, I hoped he would, but I've worked with him before and I know how busy the man's schedule is, so it felt like a pipe dream when I reached out, which is why I'm so incredibly thankful that he was able to take the time to reply to this. I know it's not his niche and is way out of his comfort zone, so it means a lot to me that he was able to take some time and provide something for me to include and analyze for you guys. Fallout, I know I've said it before, but I'm gonna say it again. You make great content, you're a great guy, and more people need to watch 50 games of CSGO, link in the description. In his words, Fallout's answer boils down as, to be human is to have the ability to invent and shape anything, but to potentially destroy it all as well. His reasons being that while animals do create, see bees or oysters, and destroy, see beavers, humans are able to create far beyond the scope of their means. And he's right. You've heard of the space race, the Industrial Revolution, McGriddles. We have the ability to create anything we can dream of, with the only limitation being whatever resources are available. But with enough time, determination, and let's be real, money, nothing is impossible. When it comes down to it, the only thing hindering mankind's progress is man itself, which brings me to the second piece of Fallout's answer. That being the potential to destroy far beyond what we should be capable of. I don't think I necessarily need to provide examples here. I mean, we all remember what happened to Japan after Pearl Harbor, and it's no secret that damn near every country with a superpower status has world-ending capabilities on standby. But hey, someone still had to create those weapons of mass destruction, and from the ruins of what's destroyed, something new can be created in its place. So I guess at the end of the day, to be human is to be trapped within the endless cycle of destroying to create, creating to destroy, hoping that whatever dream you're working towards isn't steamrolled by someone with a bigger dream and a bigger bomb. Even applying this line of thinking to Lies of P can yield results that hold up. Geppetto created the puppets didn't really like the purpose they were created for, thus the puppet frenzy to destroy all humans. Pretty cut and dry. But what about Carlo? Carlo wasn't created to be human. Carlo was created to be a vessel for Geppetto's dead son. And before the final fight, Geppetto gives you the option to fulfill that purpose, but you'd have to essentially destroy yourself in order to do so. And upon refusing, Geppetto is immediately willing to destroy you himself, so it all just comes back around to who's got the bigger stick. Will you destroy Geppetto's dream in order to create a new life for yourself? Or will you destroy your own dream of becoming human so that Geppetto can finally create the relationship he'd always wanted with his son? Would that make you human? But I'm not sure if that's what makes you human. Simplifying it down to Cartoon Network's destroy, build, destroy just doesn't do it for me. I want it to be more complex than that. Which is where my friend Royal's answer comes in. Side note, he makes super cool art that you should definitely check out through the link in the description. Anyway, Royal's answer was, to be human is to experience complex feelings and complex thoughts, and for one of those feelings to be empathy. Without empathy, people don't care for one another despite being an inherently communal species. People do bad things to each other without empathy, and that's why those sorts of actions are inhumane. And I really like this answer, specifically because he brought up the idea of inhumane actions, which wasn't mentioned in any of the other replies I received. It got me thinking, what classifies an inhumane action as such? And with Google providing me the definition of an action lacking sympathy or compassion, it almost starts to make sense. I say almost because I'm not sure why we consider the lack of compassion a non-human thing, but it's not viewed as an animalistic thing either, just inhuman? Would it be alien? Is the idea of someone acting without remorse so inherently terrifying to us that we'd rather believe those that can are an entirely different species? Is species even the right word here? Could you designate a robot to its own species classification, or would it just be another box added to the race ethnicity question so that it reads Hispanic, white, Power Rangers Mechazord? In a world where everything is a construct, why is it so hard to accept and define our constructions? It would be so much easier if instead of pushing back against these ideas, we just accepted them and let people be people. If we just loved each other. As my friend Cassie put it, I think to be human is to love and be loved, to nurture and support the people around you. I think the way we feel as people is the biggest thing that makes us different from any other living thing. And that kinda resonated with me. Love is a feeling unlike anything else. Something everybody can have a different definition of, yet we all agree that shit hits like nothing else. Think about it. There's a reason your mom's cooking tasted better when it was made with love, and it's not just because she found the seasoning this time. It's that deep appreciation of knowing she made this because she wanted to, not because she had to. Yet when we look at Lies of P, I don't think Carlos ever had that. Geppetto never loved him for what he was, only what he could be. Hell, you're even referred to as Geppetto's puppet for a portion of the game, if I remember correctly. You're rarely seen as a person, but rather as a tool that has yet to fulfill its purpose. But once you've fulfilled your purpose and everyone's seen how useful you are, things keep piling on. Like, we started out trying to stop a puppet party. Why the fuck am I fighting the arm of God on the Isle of Alchemy? I came in here expecting Victorian battlebots and ended up in a sword fight with a god trying to shape the world to his own desires. Which brings me to my brother's response, wherein he states that to be human is to be made in the image of God. That is where our value as individuals comes from, and why humans are different from animals that roam the earth. We have the ability to possess knowledge of good and evil and think rationally. To be human is to love and be loved, to know others and be known by others. And while I'm not religious myself, I can still respect those beliefs. It also helps that he unknowingly gave me an answer that ties back into the game fantastically, with the beginning of his answer talking about how to be human is to be made in the image of God. It poses an interesting question within Lies of P. If a human were to obtain the power to shape the world in their own image, would they be considered God? And if so, is it morally just for them to change everything as we know it simply because one person thinks it would be a better reality? Honestly, I don't know if I'd want to exist in a world where I know that I'm only here because some higher power created it and thus could bury me in the sands of time on a whim. It's so much more appealing to live in blissful ignorance and believe that the person I am today is due to the choices I've made to shape my own future. Sure, I may not have always made the best choices, but who has? It's an important aspect of life that I think we should embrace. We're simply humans. We're bound to fuck things up. It's what we do. But how else are we gonna figure out who we're supposed to be? And that brings me to what my mom has to say about this question, which is as follows. Being human lies in the being rather than the doing of life. It is the intangible and fleeting essence that exists with a quiet aliveness. It's in the steady rhythm of our heart beating. It's also in the quiet rhythm of our breath. Being human allows us to seek out and settle into the subtle aspects of being alive, the places where the mind can settle, our ears can listen, and our souls can feel. Being human is free from thought, free from doing, and free from judgment. It is the place where unconditional love, joy, and peace unite. And as poetically written as it is, I think this might be the easiest answer for me to digest. Not just because it came from my mom, but because it was an answer that finally gave me the opportunity to stop worrying about all of these external factors and finally fucking breathe. It might sound idealistic to just simply exist in a world where you're able to fully connect with yourself and figure out who you are as a person, and that's because it is. I yearn for the time where I'm able to simply sit down and do nothing but what I enjoy. Yet the older I get, the more fleeting these moments become. I don't like that. I don't want the time I have to enjoy and experience the world to be considered a reward for fulfilling my capitalist duties in order to keep existing. I should just be able to do what I enjoy and not have to worry about where the next meal is coming from, but that's not the way things work. And by this definition, I don't think Carlo could be considered human. Throughout the entire game, Carlo's only ever told where to go and what to do. Nobody's ever really asked him what he wants, and even if they did, he's a voiceless protagonist, so he can't answer. At the end of the day, Carlo isn't really Carlo, he's P, protagonist, playable, puppet, merely a canvas meant for you to be able to project your own morals and values onto in order to tell the story in a way that best suits you. Don't like that story? Simply play through it again and change your choices. It's like my friend Logan said when I asked him this question. I think being human boils down to the ability to change and affect oneself and the world around you. And this annoys me, not because it's the shortest answer, but because the bastard unintentionally stole mine. So, Logan, I'm sorry for hijacking your answer, but I've also got stuff I need to say. Which means it's finally time for the moment I'm sure you've all been waiting for. I'm the guy who asked this fucking question, so what's my answer and why did it take me so long to get here? And you now know that my answer for what it means to be human is to be able to change. Because if you can't look at the situation around you and ask whether it can be improved not just for you, but for everyone, then you're either inherently selfish or intentionally complacent, and I just can't fathom existing in a vacuum like that. It's hard to be happy for myself when the people closest to me aren't. Every day it gets more and more difficult to simply ignore the problems around me in order to keep feeling okay at best. I want to change things, yet there's very little I'm able to do that can directly influence the world on a grand scale. I dropped out of college before I could even contemplate switching to a degree that would let me do something, because at the time nothing interested me outside of making videos. And so here I sit at the precipice of my own creativity, staring down into this fracturing void of reality, asking myself what the fuck I could even do to fix it, knowing there's nothing I alone can do, and at this point I think I'm okay with that. The reason it took so long for me to make this video, and by proxy, the reason it took me so long to get here, is that for the longest time I was terrified to answer this question, because answering this question meant that I'd have to confront myself and come to terms with the fact that for the longest time I had no idea what being human meant. I still don't, if I'm being honest. Growing up with undiagnosed autism, it was a constant struggle to try and fit in with other kids. So I'd put on mask after mask, flitting between person after person, adopting personality trait after personality trait, all just to try and make myself more likable. And that's what I did all the way up until I was 19 years old and borderline suicidal, because I still hadn't taken any time to really figure out what the fuck I wanted to do with my life. Up until that point, I just coasted through doing whatever the adults in my life told me, because in my mind, they had it all figured out. But then I became the adult and was met with the crushing realization that not only had I not figured anything out, but I didn't even know myself. In a lot of ways, I can relate to Carlo. Maybe that's just the whole blank canvas self-insert thing doing its job, but whatever. Playing through this game, being told where to go, what to do, why I'm doing it, all felt very familiar. Right up until the moment I was sucker punched with the question of what I wanted. The longer I thought about that, the more I would spiral, and the more I spiraled, the longer I spent on this damn near 2-hour video, asking anyone and everyone I could what they thought it meant to be human, just to prolong the inevitability of having to answer that question myself. Like I said, I still don't know what it means to be human. I'm not sure I ever have. I probably never will, but I do know I'd like to make a difference with my brief time in this world. I know I probably can't impact anything on a significant enough level to really matter in the grand scheme of things, but I can at least try to impact the lives of those around me. I know I can make this video, and if all that's left of me when I've gone and turned to dust are these silly little videos on the internet, then that's something I can be proud of. Doesn't matter if 1 million people hear this, doesn't matter if just one person hears it. I made something that I'm proud of, and I can only hope that it has some sort of impact, that it makes some sort of change. In the end, all I can do is just be human, whatever that is. Thank you for your time. I'll see you later.